7 years of loyalty shattered with one swipe through a phone screen. There were no confessions, no scandals, just quiet messages building a life with someone else. That night broke more than trust. It unraveled a version of self that had been shrinking for years. What started with betrayal turned into something unexpected. A journey of reclaiming joy, setting boundaries, and learning to exist without apology. Because sometimes, the real story begins the moment you choose yourself. I never thought I would become the kind of person who checks their partner's phone while they're sleeping. Yet there I was at 3:17 a.m., heart pounding so loudly I was certain it would wake them, fingers trembling as I punched in the passcode I'd memorized weeks ago. I told myself it was just to confirm what I already knew, that my paranoia was unfounded, that the distance growing between us was just the natural ebb and flow of a 7-year relationship. The blue light illuminated my face in the darkness of our bedroom as I scrolled through messages, emails, photos, searching for something and praying to find nothing. When I finally found it, I felt no validation, no righteous anger, just a hollow opening inside my chest, as if something essential had been scooped out of me. The texts weren't even particularly explicit or romantic. They were worse than that. They were familiar, intimate in their casualness. Good morning texts, inside jokes, plans being made. A parallel life being built right alongside ours, one message at a time. I placed the phone back exactly where I'd found it, crawled back to my side of the bed, and stared at the ceiling until sunrise. Something had broken inside me, but I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I felt something far more terrifying, a quiet, determined clarity taking shape. I would never be the same person after that night. The question wasn't whether our relationship would survive this betrayal. It was whether I would. The following weeks unfolded in slow motion. I became an actress in my own life, going through the motions of normalcy while observing myself from a distance. I made dinner. I laughed at jokes. I discussed future plans, all while carrying this secret knowledge, this poison that was slowly changing my cellular structure. I started losing weight without trying. Friends commented that I looked great, not recognizing the hollowness behind my eyes. I waited for the right moment to confront my partner, but that moment never seemed to arrive. Instead, I found myself watching them more closely, studying the way they checked their phone, noting how they positioned their body away from me when replying to certain messages, cataloging the small excuses for coming home late or leaving early. Each observation was another tiny cut, barely noticeable on its own but accumulating into something unbearable. My silence became a living thing between us. It sat at our dinner table, rode in the car during our commutes, and lay in bed with us at night. My partner sensed it too, asking occasionally if something was wrong, studying my face with growing concern when I insisted everything was fine. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were worried about my secrets while I was drowning in theirs. Work became my sanctuary. There, at least, I knew who I was. My competence was unquestioned, my role clearly defined. I volunteered for extra projects, stayed late, came in early, anything to avoid the suffocating atmosphere of our apartment. My coworkers praised my dedication, while I silently retreated further into myself, building walls so high I wasn't sure I could find my way back out. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. My partner had left their laptop open on the kitchen counter while taking a shower. I wasn't even looking for evidence this time. I'd almost grown comfortable with my new reality of suspicion and silent grief. But there it was. An email confirmation for a weekend getaway, a romantic cabin in the mountains, scheduled for our anniversary weekend. A weekend they had told me they would be attending a work conference. I closed the laptop gently and walked to our bedroom. With mechanical precision, I packed a small bag, just enough clothes for a few days, my essential toiletries, important documents. I called my closest friend, speaking in a voice I barely recognized as my own, asking if I could stay for a while. I didn't explain why. I didn't need to. The concern in their voice told me they had seen this coming long before I had allowed myself to. When my partner emerged from the shower, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, bag at my feet. They froze in the doorway, water still dripping from their hair, towel clutched around their waist. Our eyes met, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something crack in my carefully constructed facade. "I know," I said simply. Just 2 words, but they changed everything. The first night at my friend's place, I slept 14 hours straight. my body finally surrendering to the exhaustion of maintaining appearances. I woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where I was and why. Then reality crashed back, and I pulled the blankets over my head, willing myself to disappear. My phone had 27 missed calls and dozens of text messages. I couldn't bring myself to read them. Instead, I shuffled to the bathroom and stared at my reflection. A stranger looked back at me, eyes hollow, skin pale. I hardly recognized myself. Had I always looked this fragile? Or was this new? When had I become someone I didn't know? My friend didn't push me to talk. They simply existed alongside my grief, making sure I ate, gently suggesting showers when necessary, fielding calls from concerned mutual acquaintances. Their quiet presence became my anchor in those first formless days when time stretched and contracted unpredictably. On the third day, I finally read the messages. They started with confusion, moved quickly to defensiveness, then pleading, and finally, anger. The last one simply said, "I never meant to hurt you." I laughed out loud when I read it, a harsh, broken sound that startled even me. Of course they hadn't meant to hurt me. People rarely mean to cause pain. They just prioritize their desires over others' well-being and call it a mistake afterward. I drafted dozens of responses but sent none. What was there to say? The facts were clear, and no explanation would undo what had been done. Instead, I blocked the number and felt a strange weightlessness afterward, like cutting free a balloon that had been straining against its string. The following weeks blurred together. I went through the mechanical motions of rebuilding a life, finding a new apartment, retrieving my belongings while my partner was at work, arranged through brief, cold emails, redirecting mail, separating finances. Each task was a small exercise in autopilot, keeping my hands busy while my mind remained carefully blank. Friends chose sides, as friends inevitably do. Some were openly supportive, bringing houseplants and bottles of wine to my new place, sitting with me through evenings when grief would ambush me unexpectedly. Others drifted away, uncomfortable with the messiness of my situation or loyal to my partner's version of events. A few tried to stay neutral, which felt almost worse than outright abandonment. I lost interest in things I once loved. Books remained unread on my nightstand. TV shows played in the background while I stared blankly at walls. Food lost its taste. Music felt too intrusive, too demanding of emotional engagement. I existed in a muted world, everything dulled and distant. Sleep became my enemy and my obsession. Some nights I would lie awake until dawn, replaying years of memories, searching for signs I had missed, red flags I had ignored. Other nights, exhaustion would claim me before my head hit the pillow, only for me to wake sweating and disoriented from dreams where I was constantly searching for something I couldn't name. My body changed too. I lost more weight. Dark circles took up permanent residence under my eyes. Friends commented with increasing concern. I assured them I was fine, that healing takes time, that I was eating, I wasn't, and sleeping barely, and taking care of myself, debatable. The lies came easily. After all, I had become an expert at pretending in those final weeks before everything fell apart. 6 weeks after leaving, I received an email from my partner. They were moving out of our apartment, relocating to another city with, surprise, the person from the text messages. They wanted to know if I would consider buying out their half of the security deposit so they could leave cleanly. The pragmatic audacity of it stunned me into a kind of clarity I hadn't felt since before discovering the texts. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I did something I hadn't done since the night I left. I cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears that had occasionally escaped during the past weeks, but deep, body-racking sobs that seemed to come from the very center of me. I cried for hours, until my throat was raw, and my eyes swollen, nearly shut. It was ugly, primal grief, the kind that leaves you emptied out and strangely peaceful. When I finally stopped, I felt different. Something had shifted inside me. I couldn't name it yet, but I sensed that the worst was behind me now. The fever had broken. I would survive this. I replied to the email with a single sentence: keep the deposit. I want nothing from you. Then I blocked that email address too, and poured myself a glass of water, suddenly aware of how thirsty I was, how alive my body felt in its exhaustion. 3 months after the breakup, I started therapy. My friend had been gently suggesting it for weeks, leaving pamphlets casually on the coffee table, mentioning their own positive experiences. I finally relented, not because I thought it would help, but because I was tired of the concerned glances, the careful way people spoke around me as if I might shatter. My therapist's office was nothing like I expected. No leather couch, no boxes of tissues positioned strategically within reach. Just comfortable chairs, soft lighting, and windows overlooking a small garden. She didn't ask me to recount my trauma immediately. Instead, we talked about my daily routines, my work, the weather. I found myself annoyed by this approach, wanting to scream on here because I'm broken. Fix me. But I didn't. I answered her mundane questions and left feeling oddly calmer than when I arrived. In our third session, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. Who were you before this relationship? I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it again. I couldn't remember. 7 years is a long time. I had entered the relationship at 24, still figuring out who I wanted to be. Now, at 31, I realized I had no idea who I was outside the context of us. That question became my obsession. I started keeping a journal, trying to reconstruct my former self from memories. What had I enjoyed doing? What had made me laugh? What dreams had I set aside in the name of compromise? The journal entries started tentatively, just a few sentences each day, but gradually grew longer, more exploratory, sometimes filling multiple pages, as I excavated parts of myself I had forgotten existed. I realized something unsettling during this process. Betrayal hadn't created the emptiness inside me. It had simply exposed it. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped growing as an individual. I had poured all my energy into the relationship, making myself smaller, quieter, more accommodating. The discovery hurt almost as much as the infidelity had, but in a different way. A cleaner pain, one that pointed toward healing rather than festering. 6 months post-breakup, I did something impulsive. I signed up for a weekend pottery class, something I'd mentioned wanting to try years ago, but had never pursued. My partner had gently discouraged it, citing the mess and expense. Now, with no one to consult but myself, I paid the registration fee and showed up early on a Saturday morning, nervous but determined. I was terrible at it. My first attempts at centering clay on the wheel resulted in misshapen lumps that the instructor kindly called organic forms. My hands were constantly coated in slippery mud. My clothes were destroyed. And yet, I found myself laughing, genuinely laughing, for the first time in months. The sheer physicality of the process, the focus required, the permission to make mistakes and start over, it awakened something in me that had been dormant for too long. I returned every weekend. Gradually, my hands learned the right pressure, the proper angles. I created objects that actually resembled what I intended them to be. The studio became my sanctuary, a place where I existed solely as myself, not defined by my past or my pain. The other students became casual friends, people who knew nothing of my history, who accepted me at face value. As I reconnected with myself, I began noticing how many aspects of my daily life still revolved around accommodating someone who was no longer there. I still bought the bread they preferred, still avoided using certain spices they disliked, still watched TV with the volume lower than I actually needed. Each realization was both jarring and liberating. I started making changes, small at first, then increasingly bold. I rearranged furniture. I played music loudly while cooking. I tried foods I'd been curious about. I stayed up late reading when I couldn't sleep, rather than lying still in the darkness for fear of disturbing someone else. I painted an accent wall, a vibrant color that would have been vetoed immediately in my previous life. During this period, mutual friends occasionally passed along news of my ex-partner. They had indeed moved to the new city. They were happy according to social media. They had adopted a dog, something I had wanted, but they had always refused. Each update stung less than the last, until they eventually felt like stories about a character in a book I had finished reading long ago. Around the 8-month mark, I had a dream that stayed with me long after waking. In it, I was in a house with many rooms, but most of the doors were locked. I had a key that would open them, but every time I approached a door, I hesitated, afraid of what I might find inside. I woke feeling unsettled but thoughtful. In my next therapy session, I described the dream, and my therapist asked simply, "What do you think is behind those doors?" "Me," I answered without hesitation. "Parts of myself I've been afraid to face." That conversation marked another turning point. I began to recognize that my healing wasn't just about recovering from betrayal. It was about confronting all the ways I had betrayed myself over the years. The compromises that weren't really compromises, but surrenders. The boundaries I had failed to establish. The warning signs I had willfully ignored because acknowledging them would have demanded action I wasn't ready to take. This realization didn't make me angry at my ex, though that might have been easier. Instead, it forced me to accept my own role in my unhappiness. Not the infidelity. That was never my responsibility, but the slow erosion of self that had preceded it. The gradual dimming of my own light to make someone else shine brighter. 9 months after leaving, I spent an entire weekend cleaning out the remaining boxes I had never unpacked after moving. Each item presented a decision: keep, donate, discard. The process was exhausting but cathartic. By Sunday evening, my apartment felt lighter, and so did I. I had kept what truly mattered to me, and released the rest, creating space for whatever might come next. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors I felt newly able to appreciate. For the first time, I could envision a future that wasn't defined by loss. The hollow places inside me weren't filling in exactly, but I was beginning to understand that perhaps they weren't meant to be filled. Perhaps they were simply making room for a newer, truer version of myself to emerge. The 1-year anniversary of my departure arrived without the emotional devastation I had feared. I had braced myself for the date, clearing my schedule, warning friends I might need support. But when the day came, I felt unexpectedly calm. I took myself out for breakfast at a cafe I loved, brought a book I'd been wanting to read, and spent 2 hours just sitting, eating, reading, watching people. An ordinary pleasure that felt quietly revolutionary. Later that day, walking home through the park, I passed a couple arguing on a bench, not loudly, but with the intense focus of people working through something significant. Without thinking, I found myself cataloging their body language, the woman's crossed arms, the man's pleading hands. I realized I was looking for signs, still habitually analyzing relationships from the outside, searching for cracks. I made myself stop, redirecting my attention to the path ahead of me. Their relationship wasn't my business, wasn't a puzzle for me to solve or a warning to heed. It was simply two people having a hard moment in public. That night, I wrote in my journal, 1 year of becoming reacquainted with myself. The strangest blind date I've ever been on, awkward, revealing, occasionally frustrating, but ultimately worth showing up for. My therapist suggested I was ready to reduce our sessions from weekly to bi-weekly. The proposal made me anxious at first. I had come to depend on those hours of guided introspection, but I recognized the vote of confidence behind it. I was developing the tools to navigate my healing without constant supervision. The training wheels were coming off. Around this time, I received an unexpected email from my ex-partner's sibling, someone I had been close to during our relationship, but hadn't heard from since everything fell apart. They were going to be in town and wanted to know if I would be open to meeting for coffee. My immediate instinct was to refuse. Why? Reopen healing wounds. But after sitting with the idea for a few days, curiosity won out. I agreed to a short meeting at a neutral location. We met on a Tuesday afternoon at a coffee shop I didn't usually frequent. They looked much the same, and something about that was reassuring. Life had continued for everyone, not just for me. After awkward initial greetings, they explained they had wanted to check on me, that they had disagreed with how their sibling had handled everything, that they missed our friendship. I listened, touched by the gesture, but wary of being pulled back into dynamics I'd worked hard to escape. I'm doing well, I told them, and was surprised to realize I meant it. It was hard, but necessary. I'm building something new now. They nodded, seeming relieved. You look good. More like yourself somehow. The comment stayed with me long after our brief meeting ended. More like myself. Was that how others saw my transformation? Had I been visibly diminished in my relationship without even realizing it? The thought was both disturbing and validating. 13 months after the breakup, a coworker asked me out. It wasn't entirely unexpected. We had been friendly for months, occasionally getting lunch together, discovering shared interests in obscure documentaries and outdoor concerts. Still, the invitation caught me off guard. I hadn't considered dating anyone since my relationship ended, hadn't even contemplated whether I was ready for that step. Can I think about it? I asked. Of course, they replied easily. No pressure. The offer stands whenever you're ready, if you ever are. Their casualness was refreshing. No manipulation, no rush, just an invitation I was free to accept or decline on my own timeline. I discussed it with my therapist at our next session. How do you feel about the possibility? She asked. Terrified, I admitted. But also curious? Like I'm standing at the edge of a swimming pool, not sure if I remember how to swim, but thinking maybe I want to try. That seems like a healthy response to me, she said. Fear doesn't mean you're not ready. It just means you understand the risk involved in connecting with someone. The question is whether the potential joy outweighs the potential pain. I thought about that conversation for days afterward. Was I ready to be vulnerable again? To let someone new learn my patterns, my preferences, my history? The idea was exhausting, but staying permanently isolated out of fear seemed equally unsustainable. After 2 weeks of consideration, I texted my coworker and accepted their dinner invitation. We went to a small Ethiopian restaurant neither of us had tried before. Neutral territory, a new experience we could discover together. The evening wasn't magical or earth-shattering, but it was pleasant. We laughed. We disagreed about a few things and navigated those differences respectfully. When they walked me home, there was a brief, slightly awkward moment at my door that ended with a quick hug and promises to do it again sometime. I didn't feel the fireworks or desperate attachment that had characterized the beginning of my previous relationship. Instead, there was something gentler, a quiet appreciation for another person's company, without expectation or urgency. We went on 3 more dates over the next month. Each was enjoyable, comfortable, but ultimately, I realized the chemistry I was looking for wasn't developing. With newfound confidence in my ability to honor my own feelings, I explained this to them honestly. They were disappointed but understanding. Our friendship survived, perhaps even strengthened by my transparency. This small experience, dating briefly, recognizing it wasn't right, ending things kindly but firmly, felt like graduating from an important life class. I had proved to myself that I could connect without losing myself, that I could walk away from something that wasn't serving me without drama or self-recrimination. 15 months into my new life, I took a solo weekend trip to the coast, something I had always wanted to do, but had never prioritized. I booked a small cottage overlooking the ocean, packed minimal belongings, and drove 3 hours with the windows down and music playing. The freedom was intoxicating. I spent those days exactly as I pleased, waking without an alarm, walking barefoot on the beach for hours, reading half a novel in one sitting, eating when hungry without concern for regular mealtimes. One evening, watching the sunset from my cottage porch, I realized I was happy, not the manic, performing for others kind of happiness I had sometimes forced during my relationship, but a quiet, private contentment that belonged entirely to me. On the final morning of my trip, I wrote in my journal, "I am not who I was before, and that's okay. The person I was before couldn't have survived what happened. The person I am now was forged in that fire. Stronger in the broken places, more compassionate toward others' failings, more protective of my own peace. I don't need to reclaim my old self. That chapter is complete. This is a new book entirely." Driving home, I felt a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in years. The betrayal that had once defined my every waking moment had receded into its proper proportion, a significant but not all-consuming chapter in my story. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely. I suspected it never would. But it had transformed from an acute, debilitating agony into something more manageable. A dull ache that flared occasionally, but no longer dictated my choices. I was no longer just surviving my life. I was building it deliberately and thoughtfully, brick by careful brick. And for the first time, I was genuinely curious about what it might become. Almost 2 years have passed now since that night. I scrolled through my partner's phone in the darkness of our bedroom. The memory still has the power to make my chest tighten momentarily, but the feeling passes quickly, like a brief storm cloud on an otherwise clear day. I ran into my ex-partner last month, the first time since our separation. They were visiting mutual friends, and our paths crossed unexpectedly at a restaurant. I saw them first, had a moment to prepare myself before they noticed me across the room. Even with that preparation, the physical impact was jarring. My heart raced, my palms instantly damp. But beneath the autonomic response of my nervous system, I realized something important. I felt nothing else. No hatred. No lingering desire. No desperate need for closure or explanation. They had become just another person who had once been significant in my life, but no longer defined any part of it. We exchanged brief, civil greeting. They looked older somehow, or perhaps just different from the image I had preserved in my memory. They asked how I was doing, and I told them, truthfully, that I was well. They seemed relieved by this, as if my healing somehow absolved them of something. I didn't correct this impression, didn't point out that my recovery had happened despite them, not because of any kindness or consideration on their part. Such clarification seemed unnecessary now, petty even. I wished them well and meant it, then rejoined my friends at our table. Later that evening, a friend asked if seeing my ex had been difficult. I considered the question carefully before answering. It was strange, I said finally. Like running into a character from a book I used to love, but have now outgrown. I recognize all the details, but they don't move me the way they once did. My friend nodded, seeming to understand something I was still articulating for myself. You've done the work, they said simply. And I had. Hours of therapy, journaling, uncomfortable self-examination. Nights spent sitting with painful emotions rather than numbing them. Days of forcing myself through the motions of living until genuine joy began to return organically. The slow, unglamorous process of rebuilding a life worthy of inhabiting fully. I recently started dating someone new. A person I met through my pottery class, of all places. It's been 4 months of careful, intentional getting to know you. I've been transparent about my past, my fears, my boundaries. They've been patient, respectful, willing to move at whatever pace feels safe to me. The relationship feels fundamentally different from any I've experienced before. Less desperate, more grounded. I'm not seeking completion or rescue. I'm simply sharing parts of my already whole life with someone who appreciates them. Most significantly, I've maintained my independence within this new connection. I still take solo trips occasionally. I keep up with my pottery classes and other activities I've developed for myself. I spend time with my own friends. I've learned that healthy relationships have breathing room built into them, space for each person to continue growing individually while also creating something new together. I'm vigilant about red flags now, but not in the hyper-alert, anxious way of those early months after the betrayal. I simply pay attention to patterns, to the alignment between words and actions, to how I feel in someone's presence. I trust my instincts more readily. I speak up when something doesn't feel right, rather than swallowing discomfort to maintain peace. My therapist, whom I now see monthly for maintenance sessions, recently asked what I would tell my past self if I could send a message back to that night of discovery. I've thought about her question often since then, turning it over in quiet moments, examining it from different angles. I wouldn't tell myself that everything would be okay. That would have felt like a platitude in the face of such acute pain. I wouldn't outline the specific steps of healing. Each person's journey through grief is necessarily their own. I wouldn't even offer reassurance that happiness would eventually return, though it has. What I would tell that earlier version of myself, the one trembling with the shock of discovery, is simpler and perhaps more important. You are stronger than you know. The very fact that you are capable of loving so deeply means you have reserves of emotional courage that will carry you through this. What feels like the end is actually a beginning. Painful, unwanted, but a beginning nonetheless. Perhaps the greatest surprise of this entire experience has been discovering my own resilience. Not the dramatic, movie montage kind where someone triumphantly overcomes obstacles through sheer force of will. Rather, the quiet, persistent kind that simply keeps going, keeps trying, keeps believing in the possibility of better days ahead, even when evidence is scarce. I still have difficult moments. Certain songs or locations can ambush me with memories. Trust doesn't come as easily as it once did. I still occasionally wake from dreams where I'm searching for something important I've lost. But these experiences no longer derail me. They're just weather passing through my emotional landscape, acknowledged, felt, allowed to move on. If there's wisdom I've gained, it's this. Betrayal doesn't just happen in a single moment of discovery. It's built slowly, through small compromises, through looking away from uncomfortable truths, through accepting less than we deserve. And healing doesn't happen in a single moment of revelation either. It's built the same way, through daily choices to honor ourselves, through gradual reclaiming of joy, through insisting on our own worth, even when others have failed to recognize it. I don't know what the future holds. My new relationship may flourish or it may end. My career path may change. Friends will come and go. But I know now that I can weather whatever comes, not because I'm invulnerable to pain, but because I've proven to myself that pain doesn't destroy me. It changes me, certainly. But those changes, when embraced rather than resisted, can lead to a life more authentic than the one that was lost. The person I was could never have imagined the person I'd become. And while I wouldn't wish the catalyst for this transformation on anyone, I can't honestly say I would undo it if given the chance. The invisible lines we cross, from trust to suspicion, from wholeness to brokenness, from brokenness to a different kind of wholeness. These crossings shape us in ways both painful and profound. I am not grateful for the betrayal, but I am profoundly grateful for who I've become in its aftermath. Someone who knows her own resilience, who recognizes her own worth, who understands that healing isn't about returning to who you were before, but about growing into someone new. Someone who carries the scars of the past, not as a burden, but as evidence of a journey survived.